Imagine a world teetering on the brink of chaos, a complex web of alliances, ambitions, and old grudges just waiting for a spark. That spark came on June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie were assassinated by a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. This single act of political violence lit the fuse that would ignite the entire continent. But why did one assassination lead to a global catastrophe? To truth, Europe was a powder keg long before that fateful day. For decades, a fierce competition had been brewing. They were scrambling for colonies and resources across the globe in an age of intense imperialism, and a powerful wave of nationalism was sweeping through, with people feeling immense pride in their countries and often suspicion towards others. This toxic mix was held together by a fragile, tangled system of alliances. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, which later became the Allied Powers, featuring France, Britain, and Russia. On the other, the Triple Alliance, or Central Powers, consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Though Italy would later switch sides, these alliances were like a series of tripwires. If one country went to war, its allies were contractually obligated to join in. So, when Austria-Hungary, furious over the assassination, issued an ultimatum to Serbia, it was more than just a dispute between two nations. Serbia couldn't accept all the harsh terms, so Austria-Hungary declared war. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of the Slavic people in Serbia, began to mobilize its massive army. This alarmed Germany, Austria-Hungary's powerful ally. Germany saw Russia's mobilization as a direct threat and, following its military strategy known as the Schlieffen Plan, declared war on Russia and then on France, Russia's ally. The plan was to quickly defeat France by invading through neutral Belgium, and then turn its full attention to Russia. But invading Belgium was a fatal mistake. Britain had a long-standing treaty to protect Belgian neutrality. When German troops crossed the border, Britain had no choice but to declare war on Germany. And just like that, within a few short weeks, the great powers of Europe were at war. The dominoes had fallen, one after another, plunging the world into what would become known as the Great War. Everyone thought it would be over by Christmas. Young men enthusiastically signed up, fueled by patriotism and the promise of adventure. They marched off to war with parades and cheering crowds, completely unaware of the horror that awaited them. The German advance into France was initially swift, but it was halted at the Battle of the Marne. Both sides dug in, creating a vast network of trenches that would come to define the war on the Western Front. This line of fortification stretched for 475 miles from the North Sea, all the way to the Swiss border. Life in these trenches was a living nightmare. Soldiers endured constant shelling, mud, rats, disease, and the terrifying threat of poison gas attacks, a new and horrific weapon of war. Days were spent in a miserable routine of maintenance, guard duty, and sheer boredom, punctuated by moments of intense terror. The command to go over the top meant climbing out of the relative safety of the trench and charging across no man's land, the shell-pocked, barbed wire-strewn ground between the opposing trenches. Machine guns would cut down wave after wave of soldiers. Battles like the Somme and Verdun became infamous for their staggering casualty rates, with millions of lives lost for gains of only a few miles, or sometimes just a few yards of territory. It was a brutal war of attrition, where the goal was simply to wear down the enemy. While the Western Front was locked in a stalemate, the war was raging on other fronts as well. On the Eastern Front, the vast armies of Germany and Austria-Hungary clashed with Russia. The fighting here was more mobile than in the West, covering huge territories. But the Russian army, though enormous, was poorly equipped and suffered devastating losses. The immense strain of the war, combined with food shortages and political unrest, led to the Russian Revolution in 1917. The Tsar was overthrown, and the new Bolshevik government, led by Vladimir Lenin, signed a peace treaty with Germany and pulled Russia out of the war. The war also spread far beyond Europe. In the Middle East, the British, with figures like T. Lawrence, or Lawrence of Arabia, encouraged Arab revolts against the Ottoman Empire, an ally of the Central Powers. Campaigns were fought in Africa and Asia as colonial powers drew upon the resources and manpower of their empires. The war was truly global, with soldiers from India, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and many other nations fighting and dying on battlefields far from home. For years, the United States had maintained a policy of neutrality, though it was supplying the Allies with weapons and goods. But two key events in 1917 changed everything. First, Germany resumed its policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking any ships heading to Britain, including civilian vessels. The sinking of the British passenger liner Lusitania in 1915, which killed over 100 Americans, had already enraged the public. Second, British intelligence intercepted the Zimmermann telegram. This was a secret message from Germany to Mexico, proposing a military alliance against the United States if America entered the war. Germany promised to help Mexico reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The combination of sinking American ships and this secret plot was the final straw. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. The arrival of fresh, well-equipped American troops, known as doughboys, gave a much-needed boost to the exhausted Allied forces. By 1918, the Central Powers were crumbling. The German Spring Offensive, a last-ditch effort to break the stalemate on the Western Front before the Americans arrived in full force, ultimately failed. The Allied forces, bolstered by American troops, launched a successful counterattack known as the 100 Days Offensive. Germany's allies began to surrender one by one. Facing revolution at home and a military on the verge of collapse, Germany's leaders had no choice but to seek an armistice. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, in 1918, the guns on the Western Front finally fell silent. The war was over. The world rejoiced, but the cost was unimaginable. Over 16 million people, both soldiers and civilians, were dead. Entire empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the German, and the Russian, had collapsed. A generation of young men was lost, and those who survived were often physically and psychologically scarred for life. The aftermath of the war was just as complex as its beginning. In 1919, the leaders of the victorious Allied nations met in Paris to hammer out a peace treaty. The resulting Treaty of Versailles placed the full blame for the war on Germany and its allies. Germany was forced to accept a war guilt clause, pay massive reparations, disarm its military, and give up territory, while the treaty aimed to prevent another war. Many historians argue that its harsh terms created deep resentment in Germany, sowing the seeds for future conflict.